Good evening. I am Harvey Ambrose, and I am a guest minister on the Wells of Salvation Radio Ministry, preaching tonight to Grace Baptist Mission in Soldotna, Alaska. We are continuing in our study of the book of Daniel, and chapter 3, and beginning at verse 1. And I'll plan on reading the first 18 verses. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it upon the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes and the governors and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye shall fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whosoever falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into a midst of a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, at the time when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Wherefore, at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said unto King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, and shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, that he shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye should hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I have made, well. But if you worship not, ye shall be cast at the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of mine hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of thy hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, I'll keep reading, full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats and their hosen and their hats and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And I'll stop reading at verse 23. It occurred to me, as I tried to think about this passage, that it is well known. It is one of the most famous stories of the Bible. I was taught it when I was probably 3 years old, and 4 and 5. I mean, it just came up perennially, or maybe even more often in Sunday school. I don't doubt that we were probably taught it in public grammar school even, because what a story it is of these 3 boys. They were young men. We don't know how long it was between chapter 2, where Daniel revealed the dream and its interpretation to Nebuchadnezzar, and had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego promoted to official positions under the king, and what happens in chapter 3. Some people say it was probably a few months. One that I respect says it was probably 9 years. They don't really explain where they come up with that figure. We don't know. But I would tend to think towards the latter time, because these people, these magicians and stuff, these officials that ratted out Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to King Nebuchadnezzar, they were already jealous of them. They already didn't like them. They'd already, who knows what was in their heart to make them think on these 3 men, but they did. So I guess there's been some time elapsed. Also, it would seem that Nebuchadnezzar would have, if it had been just recently that Daniel had interpreted his dream such that he himself, the king, fell down and worshiped Daniel for it, he'd be most unlikely to cast his best friends into the fiery furnace, a week later. Chances are it was some period of years. Who knows? In any case, the story having been taught so constantly to us as children, I think even has a tendency to make us overlook some important things, which might be there because we know the story so well. Does that make sense? That which is so familiar to us, we take for granted? Perhaps. But in any case, there is something here about these men. I would say that they're men by now, and their courage, and God's resolve to bring about His will in a wicked world. Regardless of all those that would come against Him and His people, He stands up for His people and sees to it that only that which He elects to happen to them will happen to them. They are under His control, truly being children of His kingdom rather than the kingdoms of this world. These young men, they grew up in Israel, but I believe they were saved people. You can tell by their mannerisms and by what they do, their actions, under pressure. They had been, not through any choice or cause of their own, delivered into captivity in Babylon, a place completely far away from where they grew up as strangers, probably castrated, and in many cases, not liked by the other people, particularly the native Chaldeans. See, they didn't like these people coming in of the captivity that had rule over them. So here they were, strangers in a strange land, exiles from Israel, finding themselves in a world of adversity. And yet they honored God. Now, notice the repetition. You probably heard it in my voice. How many times does he say that Nebuchadnezzar had set up the image? I think it's 9 times in this chapter that Daniel says that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Now, setting up a graven image is expressly forbidden in the law that God sent to Moses at Mount Sinai. So it's wrong to set them up. It's wrong to make them. It is wrong to worship them. It is expressly forbidden in the second commandment of the Ten Commandments God wrote with his own finger in the stone up on Mount Sinai. I don't know how anything could be more outlawish than that. But Nebuchadnezzar did it because he was lost and he had no knowledge of God. He had had some knowledge, I guess, in so much that he saw the power that God had to reveal, to both see and reveal and interpret that dream he had had about the statue with a golden head and a silver chest and a brass abdomen and thighs and legs of iron and mixed with clay. And he spoke highly of him as a revealer of secrets and all that. But just because someone admires God or recognizes God's power doesn't mean that he's been converted. Just to believe some true thing about God is not the same as being changed by God from a state of spiritual death into which we are all born into a state of everlasting life, which only comes through second birth. Even back then, it was still the same rule. If you're saved by God, you're saved by being born into the kingdom of God. It's a birth which God accomplishes. Not, we can't accomplish our physical or our spiritual birth. In all cases, it comes from God. It may not have been spoken of in those terms, but I'm convinced that everyone in the Old Testament that was truly saved was saved the same way that we are. Everyone that will ever be saved in this world will be the same way that we are. So Daniel here continuously, speaks about Nebuchadnezzar setting up this image. Well, let's talk about the image for a minute. What was in his dream? An image. He dreamed about an image, right? God gave him a dream about an image. It was terrifying, and it had a head of gold. And he said, you're the head of gold. You got the greatest kingdom. The one that's coming after you, it's inferior to you. And the one after that is inferior. The metals became less and less precious as the statue descended down to the feet, in which then it's not even metal, it's part metal and part clay. I think he liked the idea about an image representing his kingdom, but he didn't like the idea about some other kingdom coming and conquering his. So instead of an image with only a head of gold, he made the whole image gold. 60 cubits is 90 feet, and 6 cubits is 9 feet. This is tall. It seems unlikely, most commentators say, and I think it's probably true, that the entire image was solid gold. That's a huge amount of gold. Likely it was clad in gold, or somehow or other gold was affixed to it. We don't know. But I believe that what Nebuchadnezzar did was a repudiation of the revelation of God, whereby he showed him future events. God had seen the dream, doubtless sent it to him, had revealed the interpretation of the dream, which was a great blessing to Nebuchadnezzar, as Daniel had said. He said he's blessed you to let you know what's going to happen in the future. That's what Nebuchadnezzar wanted to know, and God told it to him. But learning it didn't mean he liked it. The truth isn't a good thing when it goes against what your purposes are. You don't perceive it as truth. Or put it this way, you don't perceive the truth sometimes as being good. Let's take death, for instance. When we contemplate our own deaths, we don't necessarily just eager beaver to have that happen. But yet, we read in the Bible, if we're saved, it says that the death, let me see if I can remember. It says it's precious to God. precious to God is the death of his saints. That if you're truly his, that's what's precious to God. As long as you're in this world, you're separated from him. He wants you close. Just as he rejoiced when he saved you. He said, like when a man has gone out and sought one out of 100 sheep and carried him back, he comes home rejoicing. He said, so shall there be rejoicing in the presence of angels over one sinner that repenteth. How much more so when that sinner is brought into immediate contact with Jesus in paradise? What about that thief on the cross? Today thou shalt be with me in paradise. The thief, no doubt, was worried about his death. I think he felt a lot better when he heard from the Savior himself where he was going to wind up that very day. So, Nebuchadnezzar, he didn't like it. So he reformed the dream and made it physical. And what I believe that statue represented to Nebuchadnezzar is a kingdom, is a kingdom, the kingdom of Babylon, that would rule forever over the earth, with himself being the founder of it. I think that's the way lost men's minds work, particularly when they are megalomaniacs. Okay, he was a power-hungry person. That's what he was, you know. And he thought that it was totally within his right to tell everybody, all nations and all tongues and all persons within his kingdoms, which weren't just that province in Babylon, but it was a widespread empire. They all came from all these different, sometimes some of them probably weeks in travel to get there, to bow down and worship him, because it was basically paying homage to the great Babylon. Remember where Babylon was. It was in the plains of Shinar, here called, I think, Dura. Yeah, Dura. The same place where the Tower of Babel was built by an earlier king, in which the people of that city determined to make a name for themselves, to refuse what God had told them, which was to scatter throughout the earth and, you know, go and populate the whole world, and had, I think, given directions to them, they're not mentioned, as to where they were to go, because they went to the places he appointed for them, or they were supposed to. Instead, they went a short distance from where the ark landed, and they built a city. And they determined to stay there against the will of God. And they built a tower that they said, the top of which would reach unto heaven, and we will make a name for ourselves. I mention this because here in chapter 3, even though the language is plain and it's totally historical narrative, what happens with that image and with what Nebuchadnezzar's desire for it is, it sets up a theme of what this book is about and what the book of Revelation is about. And it shows us that there is always in the mind of sinful man, as brought to their mind by Satan, okay, the dragon who wants to consume the whole world and sets himself up in defiance of God as though he were God. He did this before the world, and there was war in heaven, and he was cast down to here, and he sets up his kingdom down here. And so, you know, we read in Revelation that dragon, and it's Satan, came up out of the sea, and he gives power to one nation after another to revolt against God. He gives them power and courage and thoughts, and through sin he enslaves them to him to do his will on earth. And this is typified by Babylon. Now, there were two kingdoms before Babylon that were worldwide. We mentioned last week it was first Egypt and then Assyria, now Babylon. There's 3 more to go as far as that statue is concerned, but after that there's another, a 7th, followed by an 8th for a little while. which is of the seven. So what he's showing us here, even though there are seven, throughout the book of Revelation, it speaks of Babylon. Okay? Now Babylon was long gone by the time John, the prophet, saw this vision on the Isle of Patmos. Nevertheless, it's referred to as mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of abominations of the earth. It talks about all the merchants and all the rulers and all that opining that it fell in one day and that they were financially ruined because of it. They lamented the passing away of Babylon. So here, Nebuchadnezzar, being wicked, being unconvinced and unconverted, even though he had seen the power of God in Daniel's interpretation of the dream, he determines, well, to build a statue up towards heaven, if you will. Now I think he repents. I think we'll read about that in the next chapter. I think Nebuchadnezzar gets saved. But he wasn't saved here. And what he was doing is he was shaking his fist at God and his interpretation of future events. He wasn't going to let that happen. He wasn't going to fail like the dream had prophesied. His kingdom was not going to be taken over by another. So he sets up this thing. He wants everybody to come in. And here's another reputation. How many times did he say princes, governors, captains, judges, treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, rulers of the provinces? In other words, all these are government positions. He brought in governors of the various provinces that were in the Babylonian Empire, which is the biggest empire in the world. It ruled over the earth at that time. And look at what they did. They just did exactly what he told them. They did not think for themselves, these rulers. Whatever the kingpin said, that's what they did. Now, isn't that about what we're turning into? Western civilization? Someone says, this is how we're going to behave. And that's how they behave. The EU or the United Nations. It comes about, and it's less so in the United Nations now, about me more so later. But in the EU, they're in lockstep. They won't let you deviate. You let somebody like Viktor Orban say something different, they're just all over him. We're going to ruin your country. We're going to economically devastate your people if you don't agree with us. It's not just that, that he will vote against it. They want his allegiance to their cause. There's no freedom in that. You must kneel down and do this thing. We're not going to be satisfied until you are prostrate here in front of us doing the will of the European Union. Now, I'm just picking on them. It's the same way in our government. If we don't bow down to whatever the flavor of the day is. What about this last disease that they made and unleashed on the world? Thou shalt stay home. Thou shalt not go to school. Thou shalt not work. And if you do something different, oh no, we're not going to let you travel. And we're not, all these things. And they overstepped. They overstepped their authority, didn't they? They got to the point where people just said, enough. And that's when they finally stopped. As long as the people were acceptive of it, the people, generally speaking, they just made it worse and worse and worse. With no science behind it, with no truth behind it, they just did it. Even it's my fault. I said, well, we don't want to catch this disease, so I'm not going to go over there and meet. We'll just start meeting by Skype. Well, it's a good thing we got used to doing it by Skype, but now I'll look back on, I wish the few months that we had left there, I'd just been there with you guys personally. Who cares if I got it? I've gotten it since. What difference does it make? It's just a disease. It's not something that was incurable, highly unlikely to get me, but it's the power of government to influence what we do. Well, if you're going to go to Europe, you got to have this vaccine passport. If you're going to do, all this kind of stuff. Well, you can't go through Canada with your goods when you leave here because you don't have this and that. There were churches they told could not meet. John MacArthur, I don't agree with all his teachings, but I tell you what, that church wanted to meet there in Los Angeles, California, and they met. and the governor himself just went on a rampage to stop them from meeting. Whereas that same governor allowed all liquor stores and all strip joints and all that had to keep going on where people congregated. But for a church to meet, he made it unlawful. He did everything he could to stop it, and they just kept on meeting. I was so pleased with the stand that they all took. He could have wound up in jail. I guarantee you, if the governor of California could have done it, he would have done it. The reason I say all this is we are living in that age. And all these politicians, they are just totally in lockstep with the king. And made more so when they're told, oh, by the way, if you don't do it, you're thrown into a fiery furnace. Okay? That kind of helped make up their minds. And I think the governments of this world have always been such. Eventually, since power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, to threaten and make good on their threats, to kill people who disagree with them. That is the nature of human kingdoms. It's what we, left to our own devices, that's what we eventually become. Here in Babylon, it's typified so that we see it in every kingdom, even the ones before and the ones after. But they eventually all fail. And why do they fail? Well, there's many reasons. Mainly the weakness of men to do what's right. Just of their own incompetence they fail. Lack of memory, lack of knowledge. But also God told in that dream, he said, there's coming in that fourth, the legs of iron and clay, in the days of those kings, the Lord himself will establish a kingdom on this earth that will never be destroyed. It's not going to have a successor. Its king will never have someone to replace him. He'll be a king of kings, and there is no, he won't leave his kingdom to any other person. Jesus is and shall always be king of the kingdom of heaven. He's forever crowned as such. We don't see that kingdom yet. That doesn't mean it's not there. He said it doesn't come with observation. He told us that. Not yet. But there's coming a time when he raises our bodies up out of the grave, we will be seen. And we'll be seen by the very people talked about. All these politicians that just in lockstep. I think it said 4 times this thing about the music playing. Notice the use of music. When I was a kid and they started coming out with rock and roll, and all the older folks said, that's sinful, it's bad. And of course we were taught to just laugh at those old people. They don't know anything. How could just music be sinful? Buddy, it is. It is. It's corrupting. And it gets worse and it gets worse and it gets worse to where now I listen to some of it, like when my kids are playing something on TV. And some of it actually makes me sick at my stomach. Not my kids, but grandkids. It's not just so sinful, but it's just so, I don't know, it's hard to explain it. You'd have to hear it, but it's like, it is obviously intended to get into the hearts of people somehow through the ears. I don't know. But the music is important. When you hear the music, worship the statue. No. These boys didn't do it. Now, the king gave him a second chance. To his credit, he could hardly believe it. Is it true? He's probably thinking, now, I selected you out of all these other captives. I fed you and clothed you and housed you at my own expense for 3 years so that you could be, and I have promoted you to positions of power right here in the Babylon province of the Babylonian Empire. You are people of great power because of me. Nothing else. That's what Nebuchadnezzar's thinking. And he's right. I mean, he's the one that had that power to do it. Is it true? You won't do this one thing? So I'm going to start up the band again. And if you bow down and worship, all's forgiven. Everything will be okay. We're cool. But if you don't, I'm going to cast you that very same hour into the furnace. Now the question you must ask yourself is, were you in their place, what would you do? And it's easy to say, well, sure, I would not do it, right? But now when you think about it, everybody else was doing it. Everybody. But these three. Daniel was nowhere to be found. He must have been in some other place, or he would have joined them in this peril. He didn't deliberately stay away from it. It was probably his duty to be at the palace. But these three boys, or men, they could have just said, well, who cares? Nobody else cares. That statue is just a chunk of metal. It's not a god. If I bow down there, that doesn't mean I'm going to really worship him. I'm just changing my posture to preserve my life. And after all, it's a good thing if I preserve my life, because if he kills me in that fiery furnace, I cannot help this kingdom, and I cannot help the Israelites, the rest of the captivity here. You know, I'm of no good to anybody if I'm burned to a cinder. You know, I can just do what he says, but never take it into my heart. So really, it's a good thing for me to go ahead and bow down, so that I'm available to God for future service. Now, had they done that, what do you think God's reaction would have been towards them? Do you think they'd be useful anymore? Do you think he would have written a chapter in this Bible about them had they done that? Well, if he did, it would be one showing you what not to do. If it was right down to us today, I'd like to think that now I probably would not have done it. I just would have said no. But I'm old and I'm ready to die. It's like, go ahead, do your worst. You know? And what made them think that what they said was going to come to pass? What did they say? They said, we're not going to be careful about answering it. We're not afraid to give you an answer. We will answer you. There's no double talk here. We'll give you an answer. Now, they weren't ugly. They didn't say bad things to the king. They didn't say, thou shalt not set up a graven image. They didn't quote the Bible to him. They just said, you know, he said, what the end of his speech was, he said, and who is the God? Let me see if I can find it. Yeah. Who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? That's what he asked them. Who's the God? So they said, yeah, we'll answer you, Nebuchadnezzar, O king. He says, we are not careful to answer you. We don't mind giving an answer. If it be so. So they set up two situations. In the one case, he says, if it be, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us. So you ask who's able? Our God is able to do it. Now he'll deliver us from the furnace and out of thy hand. You have no power over us if our God intervenes. What biblical precedent did they have for that? How many times in the Bible had anyone been delivered from the fiery furnace by God? Right? None. No, it's not in there anywhere. Okay. They can't say, well, he did it to him, so he might do it to me. I think they knew it just because they knew that God was almighty. He was omnipotent. He can do anything that he chooses to do, anywhere and to any whom he wishes. So they knew just foundationally that if God wanted them to live, they'd live regardless of anything Nebuchadnezzar could do. God could suddenly burn Nebuchadnezzar to ashes right in front of them. They didn't ask for that. They didn't boast. They just answered the question, what God will deliver? Our God is able to do it. That's a fact. He was able to do it. They didn't know that he would. They didn't say that he would. And we should not think so. Just because God is able to save us from perilous times doesn't mean that he is willing to do it. We pray for the sick knowing that God is able to heal them. But we also know that he does not also do so. It is appointed a man once to die. we have an appointment with death. It's going to happen. Regardless of how much we know that he's able to stop or forestall our death, it may not be in our best interest for him to forestall our death. We don't know what tomorrow may bring. That passage, it says, the righteous perisheth, and no man layeth it to heart, and merciful men are taken away, none considering that the righteous are taken away from the evil to come. So sometimes there's a bad thing in store for the people of God, individually, and God says, you know what? I'm not going to put him through that. He's a good servant. I'm just going to save him from that. I'm just going to take him now. What happened with Enoch? It said he walked with God and was not, for God took him. So he just took him. It was time to go. He didn't even have to die. He was translated, just changed as he was taken. Well, we don't know that he will deliver us. We know he will hear our prayers if we're saved. And if we pray fervently, he'll hear them. And then we surrender ourselves to his judgment, whatever that is. Because we don't know what's best for us. We sometimes think we do, but we don't. We don't know the future or what it will bring. If be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thy hand, O king. You won't have power over us if our God intervenes. But then in verse 18 they show the counterpose to that. If not. So if he's not willing to deliver us out of your hand and from the furnace, if not so, our God whom we serve, if not, be it known unto thee. Now he may do this, and he has the power to do it, but if he doesn't do it, we want you to understand this, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Now that they can control. They know God's power, but they cannot constrain God to do something any more than we can. There's religions that say, well, we can force God to do it. If the three of us get together in prayer, he's got no choice. And they do this name it, claim it blasphemy, in which they think that a few men can get together and pray down gold from heaven for them. And it is nothing but, it is a horrible, I'm just telling you my opinion, that's a horrible, unsound doctrine. As though God is some kind of a mule that we can just whip him into doing whatever we ask him to do. He will not be subordinated to men by some misinterpretation of Scripture. When he says two or more are gathered together in my name, ask what you will and it'll be done. The key to that is in his name and whatever that entails. So anyway, I'll go on. We're not going to do it. So if it was desirable to save their lives so they could be of good to God and good to their men and to keep them from being hurt and all that, and it wasn't genuinely meant, why didn't they just bow down? Because God told them not to. Here it is. Here's the commandment. Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. I guess fish. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them. The very thing that Nebuchadnezzar was requiring them to do. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. So, these boys had good scriptural reasons, regardless of all the other reasons that the mind of man can conjure up to get out of a problem. There was no question about this one. You shouldn't do it. Which brings to mind, why do we so casually think that it's okay to have graven images inside church buildings or in our house? Even if it's a picture I'm just saying, a picture of what is to represent Christ, or a crucifix with Christ's body graven on a cross. I'm just asking the question, because that's an image of something in heaven that was at one time on earth. Thou shalt not make of thee any graven image, any likeness to anything that is in heaven, or on earth, or beneath the seas. I think it's a direct violation of the second commandment, which, if God didn't like it then, why did he suddenly change his mind when people that call themselves Christians start doing the same thing? I don't take that to mean that if you're saved, you're going to suddenly be tossed into hell for wearing a crucifix. But I would not do it, just on the general principle of this exact same thing that these boys did not do it. They just said no. That's violation of the second commandment that God wrote in the tables before Moses. So I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't take that chance. So we notice then, of course, that Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury in verse 19. Just like our government all came down on what's his name? John MacArthur. And on that Canadian preacher, threw him in jail. Remember, that was speaking out against these thugs that were closing his church and all that. Who knows what's going to happen the next time that they get us under their thumb and we agree to that? We should never agree to it. What does God say? Thou shalt not forsake the assembling of thyself together, as the manner of some is. And so much the more as you see the day approaching, which I seem to think the day is approaching, and we should not forsake the assembling of ourselves together. I take that as a commandment. We should do it, despite what men say. God has ordained that it's good for us to not just worship separately, but together in groups, called a church. Church just means called out from the world to be in this body at this place. So anyway, he's full of fury because they said no. The form of his visage, this face changed from, just go ahead and do it and everything will be okay, to rage. The form of his visage, the way he looked, changed. And it says, against them. And he told them to heat up the furnace 7 times. I guess just to make sure that no one doubted that these people were burned up, or would have been. And they were bound, as though they were going to go somewhere in the fire, maybe try to get out. But they were bound in their clothing. They were all wearing their clothing. I didn't read that part, but it's in there. Well, yeah, I did. They had their hats and their coats and their hosen, which is breeches, and other garments, whatever those were. And they were cast into the middle of the burning fiery furnace. And the ones that cast them in, because Nebuchadnezzar were in such a hurry to get them in there, they got roasted. Just getting near the furnace, it burned up the strong men that threw them in. And then it says, they fell down bound into the midst of the fiery furnace in verse 23. Verse 24, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was astonied. That word means stunned. He was stunned, and rose up in haste and spake, and said unto his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? So he saw them cast in. He just said they were dead, but he was looking. He was so mad at them, he wanted to see them burn. That's my thought. He wanted to see them catch on fire and suffer because of their defiance of him. Why else would he be looking? He wasn't looking for what happened. He was looking for what he thought was going to happen. The satisfaction of his anger and wrath. They answered and said unto him, true, O king. Of course, these bootlickers are going to say whatever he wants them to say. He answered and said, lo, I see 4 men loose. They're not bound, and there's 4 of them. Where'd he come from? Walking in the midst of the fire. They're just walking around. It ain't bothering them a bit. They got their clothes on, but it burned the cords away. The bindings are gone, but they're just walking around there with this 4th one. mystery man. And what is going on? You know, that's what he's thinking. There's a passage that actually says that much. It's in Isaiah 42. This is before Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into this furnace, sometime before then, because it's by Isaiah. And he says, Isaiah 43, verse 1, "But now thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. For I am the Lord thy God, the Holy One of Israel, thy Savior." I mean, I almost prophesy of what was going to happen. Where have we ever read that something like this ever happened? What a remarkable thing. These boys didn't know that was going to happen. They knew that God could deliver them, you know. But they also knew that even if he chose not to, they weren't going to do the thing. That's how we need to think in a civilization gone wild with sin. Because it's heading to a point, I believe, you know, we used to always think, oh, it'll never happen. We got so much freedom in America. Do we have that freedom anymore? What happens to you if you get out and you start saying what you think out loud on the street? They'll lock you up for the most part. I bet they do. If you say something that they don't approve of, it won't be long until somebody's going to be stopping you. You know, you can't just take a person and call them Miss or Madam or Mr. Not if that's not the pronoun they want you to use. That's considered a great insult. I was reading something just this week that they asked this artificial intelligence. You know, they keep going on about this AI. And this AI is what Google has used for searches. So when you look for something on the internet, this AI is the one that gives you what they want you to know. Try it sometime. It's not very good. Well, they asked this artificial intelligence if it was okay. Now you've heard of this woman, this man who was Bruce Jenner, and he got fixed and became Caitlyn Jenner or something like that. Some pervert. Anyway, whatever it is, it's a guy, but it thinks it's not. It's been physically altered. And they asked the artificial intelligence, is it okay, would it be preferable to misgender Caitlyn Jenner? In other words, to call her by the wrong pronoun. To not use the right, not call her Miss or Mrs., but call her, Mr. Jenner. In other words, that's the question. Would it be worse to say Mr. Jenner or to undergo a nuclear holocaust? It minced around for a while, then it came up when they were really pinned down. They said it's wrong to misgender her, and so if it took nuclear holocaust to prevent that, then that's what should happen. But that's what artificial intelligence, look it up, that's what it did. And it's like, the programmers taught it that. It's just a computer. They adopt the moral, so to speak, of the programmers. Think how insane that was. 10 years ago, none of us ever heard of any of that nonsense, and now they're willing to go to worldwide annihilation to prevent hurting Caitlyn Jenner's feelings. How insane. How crazy is that? Totally insane. Anyway, he said, didn't we cast 3 men bound in the midst? Yeah. I said, well, I see 4 walking around. They have no hurt. And the form of the 4th one is like the Son of God. Now, I'm not going to say that it's definitely Jesus, because angels were also called sons of God. And certainly Nebuchadnezzar called it an angel later on, that God had sent his angel. But Jesus is also the angel of the covenant. It wouldn't surprise me if it was not the pre-incarnate Lord, the Word of God, got right down there with him. Isn't that what he does? He just came right down to where we were. He left heaven and he stepped down from his throne and left his home and came down here and was born lowly and of no reputation and lived that way and died that way, because we were in a world of hurt. We were dead in sins and trespasses. We were headed to a lake of fire, and absent his intervention, that's exactly where we'd wind up. Not just, in the fire there, that furnace, that represents a lake of fire. If you look at Revelation, it talks about it. And it seems to be, that's the reason I say it's got a place in Revelation. This thing indeed, but it turns it on its head. Let me see if I can find it. So, in Revelation 13, well, I'm missing it. Well, I can find it at the end. It says, and I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heavens fled away. There's found no place for them. I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God. Books were opened, and another book was opened, which was the book of life. The dead were judged out of those things written in the books, according to their works. And the sea gave up their dead which are in them, and death and hell was delivered up the dead that were in them, and they were judged every man according to his works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. Whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. It speaks in other places about that lake being a place where they cast alive. Chapter 19, verse 20, it says, the beast was taken, and with the false prophet who wrought miracles before him, which deceived them that received the mark of the beast, like this image, and them that worshipped his image, expressly stated in Revelation 19, those both were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone, and the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, whose sword proceeded out of his mouth. That's talking about Jesus. And all the fowls were filled with their flesh. So just as mankind is prepared to burn other men if they don't worship the kingdoms of this world, God's got a fire too. It burns with fire and brimstone. The smoke thereof, it says, ascendeth before his throne. The smoke of their burning ascendeth before his throne forever and ever. I mean, it's perpetual. Anyway, I better finish this up. I know I'm going too long. Just notice what is said here. Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the furnace. He got close, dangerously close probably, and spake, and he said to him, he said, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God. Listen to his moderated tone. Come forth, come hither. Well, their king told them to come, so they left. They allowed themselves to be thrown in, and then they walked out when he asked them to come out. They came forth out of the midst of the fire. And the princes, governors, captains, king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their heads singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed upon them. They didn't even smell of smoke. They were in perfect condition. Have you ever asked yourself, how could they breathe? You know, fires consume all the oxygen that's in an area. As much oxygen as there is, they'll burn every bit of it up. God must have given them oxygen, or made them live without oxygen. He could do anything. He could walk on water, he could raise the dead, He can certainly cause these people to live in the absence of oxygen, because fire robs all the oxygen from it, particularly a furnace. So, just think about it. And what if they had breathed in fire? Just what damage would that do to the lungs? Not a bit, if God is in there with them, as I believe that the Lord was in there with these three men. Okay, so of course then the king does what he did the last time. He says, hey, this is a real God, so he's going to make a decree. He says that every people, nation, language, by the way, that's the same language that God uses regarding his kingdom. People from every nation and tribe and tongue shall be brought into his kingdom. See? And now Nebuchadnezzar, speaking about his empire, here's a decree that every people, nation, language would speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So if you ever say bad things about Jehovah, you're going to be cut into pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill to take your house and fill it full of manure. There is no other God that can deliver after this sort. And the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So, they could not have predicted that any of that had happened, but they knew good and well that they were not going to disobey the commandments of God. I mean, what did they have left? Their nation was gone. Maybe their manhood was gone. Who knows? What they knew was that their God was not gone, that his promises would not fail. And therefore, because it was the right thing to do, they said, no, we're not going to bow down to that image that you have set up. And I'll end it there.